We are live. Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Mature Audiences Only. We are going to be having less of like a silly conversation today. It's definitely going to be a little bit more on the serious side. I know we're all super curious on some of the updates of the quadruple homicide that happened in Idaho recently of the 4 students that were unfortunately brutally murdered back in November. So we're just going to go hop right into it. I kind of wanted to wait on touching on this subject because it's an ongoing case and it's obviously apparently getting a whole lot of media coverage. It's turning into a media frenzy. And we've seen this happen in the past, that when something blows up like this, so it's such a high level because it's such an intense case, a lot of facts can either get misconstrued, narratives can be spun, the media can grab a hold of it, and it just blows up into a whole thing. So before I jumped into it, I kind of just wanted to ensure that I had as much information as possible. And now I do feel like we have a pretty solid amount of information regarding the case, who the police are looking at, why that person's a suspect, and what's going to happen in the oncoming months. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. It's a lot of information, so I may be jumping from here down to my laptop, which is down here, just so you know. So if you see me looking down here, that's why. So just for a little bit of backstory, if you don't already know, I do have a master's degree in criminology and criminal justice. I'm not currently practicing in the field. However, it is something that I'm super passionate about. And in the future, I'll definitely be jumping into that field. But I do have a master's degree in this subject, which is kind of crazy because the person we're going to be talking about has the literal same exact degrees as me. But it was just kind of interesting. So I'll have a little bit to say about that. So I do know a little bit about this stuff. I think I have a lot of background knowledge and a lot to offer the space, which is why I started a podcast and why I started a YouTube channel in the first place. I know I can be really silly at times, and I think I'm just trying to find my footing in what type of show I want to be, whether it be more of like a crime network and where we talk about serious and current events, which I do feel like I could offer a lot to that genre as like a up-to-date crime network. However, people are so quick with it. Editing a video takes me forever. And so, I mean, a lot of these crime channels, man, they are just fast on it. I swear, like something will come out. They have a full feature-length movie video already done. So it's a little hard for me to keep up on that. So we'll see. If you like this style and you want to see more of this, totally let me know. How are we doing on brightness? Are we a little bright? I know I'm a little pale. I'm a little pasty. Okay. But yeah, so going forward on this case, I'll definitely do my best to keep you updated on what's going on to the best of my knowledge. There's different information coming in every day. I do think we'll receive even more information in the upcoming months. But most recently, one bombshell piece of information that actually got released about a week ago, as you may know and you may not know, the Moscow County Police Department actually released an affidavit as of last week, which outlines all of the information on everything that happened leading up to the arrest of their most recent suspect, and his name is Brian Kohberger. So last week they did release an affidavit. And so this gentleman, no, he's not a gentleman. I mean, we don't really know. But Brian Kohberger has not been found guilty or anything of that yet. This is simply their prime suspect, and they gathered enough information on the police's side to essentially be able to issue a warrant for this person's arrest. So they have him in custody. He's currently being held, and his court date has been scheduled, which we'll get to in a little bit. Just so for some of you who may not know, not all of us know, anytime that there's a crime scene or a crime, police officers, crime scene investigators, they have to fill out a lot of reports. It's not just go investigate and leave. No, the crime scene investigators, coroners, and essentially almost everyone there has to fill out a report of everything that they see, everything that they saw, how the crime scene looked. Essentially, they have to map out inch for inch exactly how the crime scene was. And of course, the crime scene investigators have their part to play. Usually they're investigating the evidence, but the police and the detectives are also there filling out their own reports. And so the affidavit that you may have heard, I mean, it's kind of like just a broad word, released by the Moscow County Police. And so what an actual affidavit is, what that specific document was, it's basically a written version of swearing under oath. So just like you were testifying in a courtroom. So that document is essentially his report, piece by piece, of everything that happened into the events leading up to the arrest of their current suspect. What type of evidence was collected, and then how those pieces of information, of course, led to the certain arrest. And so that timeline and that piece of information, that is going to be used in court when their prime suspect, the person that they have right now, is tried later on. But yeah, essentially you're just swearing under oath that this is like the truth, and you're like putting it in writing, and they're going to use that as evidence in the courtroom. So on November 14th, 2022, Moscow police responded to a crime scene at around 4 p.m. And it was described as one of the most horrific crime scenes that this police department has ever seen. And when I say that, that is pretty serious. I mean, a lot of these police officers and a lot of these detectives that had been on this case had worked in the police force for like decades. Like, these weren't just like new, young whippersnapper police officers. These guys had worked for the police department for a long time. So the fact that this case was quoted as one of the worst that they had ever seen or witnessed, it really says a lot to just how vicious this crime was. And there were a total of 4 decedents. There was Madison Mogen, who was 21, Kaylee Goncalves. I'm sorry if I'm going to butcher anyone's names. I'm going to do my best. Kaylee Goncalves, who was 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20. And Ethan was the only male. So there's 5 total roommates in the home that were living there, and then you had Ethan, who was the boyfriend of one of the girls. So upon seeing all the decedents, all of the victims apparently had passed away from stab wounds by an edged object. So if you aren't sure, an edged object could be anything that is like that has a blade. So it could be a knife, it could be a sword, it could be any type of blade weapon. So blade. And so going back to the fact that the police department had said that this was one of the worst crimes that they had ever seen, it was really bad. So this wasn't just like they found some kids with stab wounds. It was like a really horrific, vicious scene. And it was so vicious that in some of the original crime photos that you can see that were released, I'll show you one right here, you could actually see blood seeping out of the home because there was so much blood. It was actually seeping out of the house. So naturally, a case like this sent shockwaves throughout the entire nation. You have 4 beautiful, young, just normal looking college students, 4 of them being murdered in the middle of the night in a college town that no one heard anything. Somehow, it just didn't make any sense. I know it's not a good time, but Lou, it wants to hang out. I'm sorry, bud. I'm busy. Here you go. And not only that, it's a college campus, so of course there's a lot of other students living in there, and parents and everyone, like, they don't know, is this a person that's on the loose that is just going around and killing people? Is this a crime of passion? Was it an ex-boyfriend? Was it an inside job? There's just so many possibilities, and it's just such a crazy situation that of course naturally this would blow up. And this isn't the first time that we've ever seen this in history. So of course a very famous situation was that of Ted Bundy, who is a very prolific and famous serial killer that did something very similar. He targeted women mainly, but one of the main areas that he targeted was college campuses. So when we see something like this and 4 college students are unfortunately murdered in their sleep out of nowhere with no one in the surrounding area having any idea what's going on, it makes you wonder, is this another serial killer that we're dealing with? Is this like a rogue situation? Is it a crime of passion? What the heck is going on, and how is this able to happen? So initial police officers had already been on the scene and they were already processing everything. And then detectives had come a little bit later on. Brett Payne apparently was one of the main detectives. And so the officers started walking him through the scene. So this was a 3-story house, and Xana Kernodle's bedroom was on the 2nd floor. So the middle level. And as they approached her room, they could evidently already see that her body was deceased. Alongside her was her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin's body. From there, they then went up to the 3rd story of the house where there was 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And so the bathroom on the west was Kaylee Goncalves's, and she shared a bathroom and a wall with her roommate, Madison Mogen. And so both Kaylee and Madison were both found in Madison's bedroom. They were both laying on her bed. And what police found was a tan knife sheath just sitting right on the bed, just right next to Madison's body. And so what a knife sheath is, it's essentially like a cover for a knife. So, you might clip it on your side. And so what they found on that knife, on it, stamped on the side, was the USMC Marine Corps stamp. And that was really peculiar to them because, okay, that tells us either someone in this room is in the Marine Corps, which isn't likely, either one of the roommates. I mean, they're all going to college, so it's very unlikely that one of them is in the Marine Corps. Possibly someone who was in the Marine Corps gave them that knife, so a family member, a friend, someone left it there. Or the assailant who had used a knife or a blade of some sort had used that and then accidentally left that piece of information there. So definitely a huge piece of evidence for them to collect, and they sent that in for DNA processing. And that would prove to be a super, super important piece of evidence in this case, which we'll get to in a minute. So there were two other people in the home that night that were left utterly unscathed, thankfully. There was Bethany Funke and you had Dylan Mortensen. And so the only difference in this whole thing was that their bedrooms were located on the first floor, while the other roommates were on the second and the third floors. And so to police, we either have two people who were potentially involved, either set this up, had a hand in the murders, or on the other hand, they were completely innocent and were just so lucky that they were bypassed by this insane event and this murderer. And so police had to take all of this into consideration. And yes, of course, they were interviewed extensively, and they're not being considered as involved in this case whatsoever. But this is what one of the roommates had to say. So according to Bethany, she was on the first floor. And so she had seen Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle together at the Sigma Chi house, which is like a sorority house on campus. But so Bethany for sure confirmed that they were there on campus from approximately 9:45 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. And so, according to Bethany, she heard Xana and Ethan arrive at approximately 1:45 a.m. that evening. She was alone at home, and that's when she heard them get home. So Ethan wasn't a full-time resident of the home. He was dating one of the roommates, I think Xana, and so he was likely just going to be spending the night that night. But he didn't live there full-time. What spooks me about this is that the offender who caused this was either waiting in the home for a really long time, like possibly he snuck in before Bethany even got home. He was in there in position, she got home, and then he waited until the roommates on the top floors got home, and then he waited for hours longer, for at least 2 hours while everyone was home, and then he committed the crimes while everyone was sleeping. Or possibly she was home and she didn't lock the door and he snuck in. Like, there's so many possibilities, and we don't know that information yet. But that's what creeps me out the most. Not the most, but that's a big part that really creeps me out, is just thinking about how he got in and how long he was in there until he did anything. So as for the other two victims, Madison and Kaylee, so they had gone to a local bar that night, and witnesses as well as the roommates could confirm this. And so there's actually video footage that shows the pair at a bar between the hours of 10 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. on November 13th. And so then shortly after, there's also this video footage of them heading to a truck, like a food truck nearby all the bars, and that was called the Grub Truck. That was at around 1:30 a.m. A friend of the pair actually would later say that he would drive the pair back home that evening because they were at the bar together, and he was like, hey, I might as well just drive you home. And so a couple of weeks ago, or even back like in December, I don't know if you had seen on the news, it was like hooded figure in video at the food truck, and this guy looks suspicious. That actually ended up either being one of the friends, or it was just a guy that was at the food truck at the same time. He ended up checking up as well. So that gentleman did not end up being one of the prime suspects, even though that was kind of like talked about in the news. So according to Dylan and Bethany, they said everyone was for sure, to their knowledge, back by 2 a.m. and that everyone was in bed by 4 a.m. So they heard everyone getting back. They kind of heard, some noise, maybe people talking and footsteps, because again, they're on the bottom floor, so they could probably hear everything that's going on, which is kind of crazy. Even in my early 20s, I'm in my late 20s, but staying up till 4 a.m., that's a long night. But I guess college kids, if you're hanging out late, you're up pretty late, I suppose. However, the pair also heard that Xana Kernodle, that she had actually ordered DoorDash and that it was delivered around 4 a.m. as well. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, DoorDash guy, who's this guy? Well, he would actually end up checking out as well. The police actually, they were able to speak with the DoorDash driver and they were like, I literally just dropped it off. Everything seemed cool. Yeah, so the DoorDash driver checked out, which is also crazy because if there was someone in the house planning all of this, they didn't plan on the DoorDash. If they had already started attacking the people inside the home, maybe the DoorDash person would have heard something or have been able to get some clues. Like, it was really wild when I tell you in a second at what the time frame of all the attacks, what the police think it was. It's just really crazy that the DoorDash person literally came like right before. Minutes. I'm telling you, like minutes before this entire thing happened. So yes, suspicious, but they ended up checking out. So Dylan, the roommate on the first floor, she thought she heard Kaylee upstairs like wrestling or playing with her dog because Kaylee actually shared a dog with an ex-boyfriend. And so the dog had been at the house with them during this whole time. But shortly after that, she heard what she thought was her roommate saying, "There is someone here." And so she heard that and she was like, what does that mean? And so the fact that she heard her roommate say that is really what gives me the shivers and just gives me the heebie-jeebies about this case, because being a woman and also being a woman that lived by herself, I lived by myself for a couple years, just like my first apartment or whatever. I don't anymore, thank God. And just, I'm super hyper aware, and I think a lot of women are, just because we just have to be so careful these days. So literally any noise that I hear in my house, if I'm home alone, or even if I'm sitting on the couch with my boyfriend and the cat, if I hear a noise in the closet or if I hear a noise at the other end of the hall, I'm like alert. I'm like, what was that? Like sometimes our refrigerator, like the ice will drop and it just like makes banging noises, and it literally just sounds like someone is like knocking on the window, or it sounds like I think it sounds like someone's trying to break in the house. So it always freaks me out. What I'm saying is that it's a common fear that when you hear a noise, that there's someone there. And 99.9 times out of 100, that's true. It's just like our imaginations playing with us. We're a little hypervigilant and we're just freaked out. So the fact that they heard something, and the fact that there really was someone in the house and that they ended up seeing him, and of course what happened next, it's literally a nightmare come true. And my heart really goes to the victims and their families because it's just so incredibly terrifying. So after she heard all of that, Dylan stated that for the first time, she opened her bedroom door because it had been closed. She opened her bedroom door, looked out into the hallway just to kind of like see what was going on. Again, it was 4 a.m. She had just been woken up and she heard them talking. So she kind of just like opened the door just to see just checking out what's going on out there. She looked out the door, didn't see anything, didn't make anything of it. She has a ton of roommates. It literally could have been anything. So she shut the door again and went back to sleep. But then for a second time, she started hearing what sounded like was her upstairs roommate crying. She heard like whimpering and crying. And then shortly after that, it was followed by a male's voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." To which she was like, okay, like clearly something is going on up there. Do I need to go help? Like, just curious again. So again, she opened her bedroom door, just looked out to see if she could hear anything, and she didn't hear anything. So we don't know exactly what she was thinking in that moment. Again, it was late. She could have been thinking it could be Ethan and her arguing, or maybe like she received a mean text message. And she has a lot of roommates, and I'm sure that she was used to hearing random situations that would happen. So she just ended up closing her door again and went back to sleep. And so then she tried going back to sleep again. But she just kept hearing noises upstairs. She still continued to hear the crying. So for a third and final time, she opened her door and like at this point, she was like gonna go check out and see what was going on upstairs. Because it's 4 a.m. Why is everyone still awake and making so much noise? Like, what can I do to help? And as she opened her door, standing in front of her, walking towards her, was a man dressed all in black. So essentially just like the typical like black ninja outfit. So black mask, only his eyes and his nose were showing. He was about 5'10". He had pale skin, and he had what she described as bushy eyebrows. And so she opens the door, it's dark out there, and she sees a man walking down the stairs and walking towards her. However, the back slider door area, like where the exit is, that's right past her room. So he walks towards her and he just walks right by her. And she claimed that she was just in shock. So she closed her door, passed out, and like went to bed essentially. And so the house next door to their home actually had video cameras set up, to which one of the cameras actually sat in a position that was only like 50 feet away from Xana's room. And so when police did a sweep of all like video and surveillance footage like around the area, they looked at that one, of course. And at approximately 4:17 a.m. on this camera, you can hear a cry or like a whimper. So definitely like someone that's in distress. And then you could also hear like a really loud bang. And you can also hear the dog barking. And so that was at around 4:17 a.m. And so it would take Dylan approximately 8 hours to eventually contact the police. Apparently at around noon, she did come out of her bedroom and she noticed that her roommates weren't woken up yet. She went and looked, and when she had seen someone's body on the floor, she said that she just thought that they were passed out and that they weren't getting back up, and that she either thought they had drank too much or that they were sick or possibly roofied or something of that nature. So she actually called a couple of other friends to come over and help her call the police. And then that's when they did, and then uncovered the rest of the bloody scene. And so the roommates who ended up calling the police have actually received a lot of scrutiny, because Dylan, I believe it was, who had seen the black figured man, you know, people just weren't really buying it. They're like, you're telling me you heard all this commotion. You weren't like worried enough that you would call the police or maybe call your roommates to see if that they were okay. And even after the guy came and was walking towards you, like you didn't think to call the police, or that was weird. Like you just locked yourself in the room. People did think it was sketchy. And on the surface, yes, like it could sound sketchy, and like as to why she wouldn't just automatically call the police. However, we have to keep in mind, these are 20-year-old girls living in this house. We all deal with trauma differently. She literally could have been in shock and had either one, not even remembered what had just happened. Maybe she didn't process it. Maybe she was so scared that she passed out, or just, you know, totally just like fell back asleep. Or maybe it was just so bizarre that she really didn't think anything of it, and she just thought that was like someone leaving, or maybe Ethan leaving, and that it wasn't any of her business. I mean, she had a lot of roommates, and so it literally could have been anything. I get it where people are like, come on, like you didn't call. But if I'm being honest, like I could see me doing something similar. If it just depends, because I feel like I'm not the most gullible person, but I'm also not like the smartest person when it comes to like really obvious situations that you would think would be obvious, and like it'll go over my head, you know? I can see like me being down there and being like, oh, there's like so much ruckus happening up there, and either I'm freaked out or I'm just, you know, maybe I just didn't notice. And it was like, what do you mean you didn't notice that this guy ran past you? It'd be like, I don't know. My roommates are always getting into trouble. I'm not their keeper. Like, I don't pay attention to all the boys that come in and out of this house. You know what I mean? So be kind. You know, the police checked her out, and the professionals say like, they don't think that she has anything to do with it. If anything, she's a victim in the situation, and none of us know how we're going to react when we're going through trauma and something crazy. So anything could happen, and just be kind to each other. At the home, once police were there and processing the scene, a latent shoe print would actually be found at the scene, and that would be taken for processing. Oftentimes, how they can take a latent shoe print is either through casting. This was on the carpet, so I'm not entirely sure if that was how they ended up doing it. Castings, when they kind of fill it and they'll make a mold of the shoe print, or a lot of times they'll have like a type of spray, depending on if like the shoe print was dusty, or if it was like a bloody shoe print. It wasn't. But they found a shoe print, and it had a very particular diamond pattern, which would resemble a Vans shoe. That shoe print was found like directly in front of the roommate that had experienced him walking past her. They had found that shoe print directly in front of her door, which would align with her claim that he walked like directly past her. So they did collect that and they sent that for processing. It hasn't been confirmed if the suspect in custody right now, which we'll get to in a second, if he did own any Vans shoes, we really don't know yet. They haven't released that information. However, there are photos that have been collected of the roommates prior to the situation off of a police body cam when they had responded to a noise complaint at their home. And the person who answered the door did have a pair of Vans sneakers on. So the Vans shoe print evidence, although it was included in the affidavit, it's not entirely likely that that will be able to be used as evidence because Vans is a very common shoe, especially among younger people in college. That's probably not the most substantial piece of evidence, but it was something to note. So police would go and they would conduct what's called a video canvass, which is just essentially an extensive overview of all of the video surveillance, any footage that was taken in the surrounding area, because they want to see who drove in, who walked around, like any activity that was happening in that area that entire day. And so what they noticed was a single white sedan with no front license plate that passed by the home nearly 4 separate times between the hours of 3:29 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. Kind of suspicious, right? That's literally the entire time frame of all of this occurring. And so, of course, that looked very sketchy due to the time and due to the very few cars that are driving through a suburban community at that time. Yes, you have your exceptions. Yes, there's people who were sleeping over or, left people's houses, or maybe people were going on vacation. We don't know. To pass back and forth 4 times, it is a little sketchy and suspicious. And so police were definitely going to look at that. They saw a very sketchy white sedan looking car driving back and forth several times through the period in question. The authorities actually passed this information along to a member of the forensic examination team or the forensics team. So essentially, you'll give this guy the details of the car and he'll be able to tell you what he thinks the make and the model of the car is, what year he thinks it is. Like, they will send him photos and give him like the little details and he'll be like, oh yeah, that's like a 2016 Toyota Camry. Or he just knows, like he's very he specializes in cars. So this is the guy. So they give this guy all the information and he determines it could be a white Hyundai Elantra. My dad used to work for Hyundai between 2011 and 2016. And it's so crazy how accurate this guy is, you guys. Like, this guy freaking nailed it, like insane. Next step in terms of the police's search is to find out everyone who could be in the general vicinity that owns that car. And so they looked into all the video footage of the surrounding area and they determined where that Elantra was likely heading in those videos. So, they looked at the videos and they were able to determine what direction he was going. Like if he was leaving, if he was coming. Yeah, they can do that. They'll piece it all together. It's crazy. On December 25th, local law enforcement announced they're be on the lookout for this Elantra looking car. So traffic stops, stop them, let us know who's driving them. And so on November 29th, local law enforcement was running inquiries on any white Hyundai Elantras in the area. And they did locate a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra registered to a Brian Kohberger in the area. And he also attended Washington State University, which was only just a couple miles away. It's like, okay, we have a vehicle, we have a person, and they're pretty close by. And so he actually lived in Pullman, Washington, which was not very far away at all from the area of the slangs. And so they actually run the tags of the vehicle, locate his address, and then they also locate his driver's license. There's a copy of his driver's license out there in the abyss. And they look at the physical indicators. So they look at what he looks like, how tall he is, his photo, and lo and behold, all of the indicators match to the T what Dylan had said when she saw him. 5'10", pale complexion, and they said bushy eyebrows. He has pretty thick eyebrows, I guess, if you look. I mean, he's a guy. A lot of guys have bushy eyebrows, but noticeably bushy eyebrows. Interestingly enough, Kohberger had actually been stopped at several traffic stops in that year prior. So Either he was speeding or there was just like a lot of traffic stops. I mean, in California, like we have like DUI checkpoints that I've seen, but not a whole lot just like traffic stops. But he had actually been stopped at like quite a few the year prior. So he was in the system. And so since he had been stopped at like several traffic stops, his phone number was already in the system with police. So they were able to get his phone number, and they determined that his cell service that he used, it was like an AT&T phone number, which means that they could start now snooping around at where his cell phone had pinged at the time of the murders and like before and after. So that's how they can locate you in these situations. Further inquiries would also show that Kohberger has family, like parents and what have you, and they were living in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. So like way over here. So like not in this general area. Okay, so let's learn about this Kohberger fella and like what he's all about. So Brian Kohberger is currently 28 years old. And what also kind of sparked a lot of interest in this story is that he is currently a PhD student attending Washington State University, and he's going for his PhD in criminology and criminal justice. And he has a master's degree in criminology and criminal justice, and he got a bachelor's degree in psychology, which is really weird because that's the bachelor's degree and the master's degree that I have. He's given us a bad rep. But it caught a lot of attention because this guy clearly is interested in forensics. He was really interested in learning about criminology and, you know, the justice system. He had applied to volunteer at the police force. He wrote like an entire essay about how the police can use technology and cloud-based systems to aid and increase public safety. You know, clearly he was dedicating a lot of time and research on how to help police, which is kind of interesting. Was he really trying to help? Is he just really obsessed with crime? That's kind of the thoughts that everyone are kind of having right now. It's like, very interesting. It's like when police officers go rogue, but that happens a lot. It's really not uncommon for police officers, detectives, for them to go rogue and for them to be corrupt. So it's kind of interesting. It's to see this dichotomy of people dedicating their lives to a subject, but because they're so obsessed with the subject and they have ulterior motives. So very interesting. This guy also posted a survey on Reddit a while back that asked participants to answer how emotions and psychological traits impacted their decision making when committing a crime. Yeah, he like wanted to interview criminals on Reddit, and that's like who he was looking for to like answer like all those questions. He was like, criminals, reach out to me, like I want to know what, you know, emotions went into committing the crime and all of that. So why is that significant? Well, for one thing, he posted it to Reddit. Like, what professional posts things on like a Reddit? Like if he was seeking out that information for like his PhD or his dissertation, why would he post that on Reddit? Like I don't think you'd be allowed to use like Reddit forum style answers. It just doesn't sound legit to me. Like it sounds a little off to me. Like obviously the university would not permit that information to be like used in actual formal dissertation. It's like the same as using like Wikipedia. Like you can't use Wikipedia in a paper. You can't use it as like a reference. So for him to like create like a whole ass Reddit forum and everything, it just seems like he was doing that for like personal use. And I think that's a big reason also why this whole story got blown up, because people were like, what the heck? Like he wanted to be a criminologist. He was really active in the field. He, you know, applied at a police station as like a volunteer and all of that. So eventually a search warrant was submitted for the phone. They found out the cell service. It was AT&T. So they wanted to find out where he had been. It turns out that at the period of the slayings, so between the hours of like 2 and 4, let's say, his phone did not ping at the location of the house. It didn't show anything. It's not that they showed him over here or over there or there. They didn't see him at all. And so to police, in which that they included in their affidavit, they actually said there's a couple reasons why. It could mean that he wasn't there, or it could also mean that his phone was on airplane mode. It could mean that he left his phone like elsewhere while he was in there. Like maybe he didn't take his phone. The police and the prosecutors are going to try spinning like, listen, like you could turn your phone off and that's going to cause that also. Just because it wasn't there doesn't mean that he wasn't there. And then on the latter, or on the flip side, the prosecution could say, like, listen, that's not definitive evidence showing that he was there, though, because when you are trying someone, you're innocent until proven guilty. And the fact that his phone didn't ping there doesn't count as evidence. Like, it's basically like equivocal. Of course, it's going to be a trial, like a jury trial. So, it's going to be whatever that they determine. But yeah, so his cell phone did not ping in the house during the time of the slaying. However, they were able to ping the phone number that he was using, and they did notice that the phone's movements were consistent with the movements of the white Hyundai Elantra that they looked at the video footage. So they could see that the path of travel for where the phone was pinging, it was pinging in the same directions, the same general direction that the white Hyundai Elantra had been showing on all that video surveillance footage. So that's essentially what he has going against him in those two areas. But yeah, I didn't know airplane mode was undetectable. However, here's another crucial piece of evidence. So remember that knife sheath that we talked about when the police had first discovered the bodies? So they took that knife sheath and they did DNA testing on it. So they processed it for DNA evidence, and what they found was that on just the button clasp alone, so literally, it had like a little flap that probably locked it in place. Well, they swabbed the little button clasp and they did find DNA evidence on there. They didn't find Brian Kohberger's DNA. It wasn't a direct match through him. However, what they did find was a 99.98% match of DNA with someone else who lived over in Pennsylvania. And guess who lives in Pennsylvania? His parents. Yes. So the DNA match actually had a hit on his father's DNA. And so that just means that Brian's DNA wasn't in the system before. I mean, that happens. If your DNA isn't in the system, if you've never done one of those 23andMe's 23andMe, they collect your DNA. It does. So that means that his father did like a 23andMe, or maybe he was at a doctor's appointment where they had to swab him for some DNA, whatever have you. His father's DNA was in the system, and that DNA linked to the sheath that was inside the home. And so what police had to do at that point, they went over to their residence in Pennsylvania, dug around in the trash, and collected some additional samples as evidence, and they were able to confirm the DNA match even further. In addition to that, I did read that they clipped the fingernails of some of the victims and that they also found DNA under the fingernails. And I believe that DNA did coincide with the DNA that was linked with the knife sheath. I think that DNA evidence is going to be super important to the case. It's concrete evidence, like why was his sheath with his DNA on there, and just the fact that the vehicle was in the area at that time. I think it's a pretty strong case against him. However, when you're in the court of law, you're innocent until proven guilty. So the question is, will that be enough evidence to prove that he was guilty? Because maybe he did know them. Maybe he did give a knife to her, and maybe it's just a series of unfortunate events for that guy if he didn't do it. Maybe he had given her a knife and she defended herself with it, and the real assailant took the knife or used it against her. These sort of things could really happen, and when you're processing these clues, you do have to take them into consideration. I know it's really exciting when we do have a person that we want to blame, but in the court of law, you do have to prove their guilt. You have to prove their guilt. Although I do think it is a pretty strong case against him. After that, they were able to issue a warrant for his arrest, and Brian Kohberger would be arrested on December 30th, 2022, right in time for New Year's. So he spent New Year's in jail. And so he had his initial court hearing on January 4th. And essentially, he is just kind of waiting. According to his lawyer, he is excited to be exonerated. He just keeps saying, I'm excited to be exonerated, which is a little fishy also, because he's not really saying I can't wait to be proven innocent. This is wrong, this is wrong. He's saying, I can't wait to be exonerated. And what it means to be exonerated is you're let out after the fact, after you've been sent to prison. So it's just kind of weird. I mean, he's a criminology student. He was applying for his PhD. He should know these terms. So it's either he was just freaked out by everything going on and he said exonerated, or he's expecting to be sentenced and wants to be exonerated or plans to be exonerated later. However, Kohberger's family is saying that they are fully cooperating with police. They really don't know what's going on. They really don't think that their son had anything to do with this, essentially going to be there for their son. They think that these assumptions are erroneous and completely wrong because they don't think that their perfect son could do anything like this. So they're going to cooperate fully, but they're going to stay by his side. Meanwhile, the families of the victims are so relieved that the police at least have someone in custody. Brian, coincidentally, had actually just been arrested the night before the victim's memorial. So the family was super relieved. A lot of their friends were just so happy that someone had actually been arrested. And essentially they said that it just did bring them a certain amount of peace knowing that someone had been arrested for the crime. But yeah, in terms of the victims and the families, no one had ever heard of this Brian Kohberger guy. No one has said like, oh yeah, he was an ex-boyfriend. He used to hang out at the house. No one seems to have any ties to him at all. None of the friends say that they recognize the guy. So determining a motive for this crime has been really difficult. And I would say that we really don't know one yet. And whether, if it was him, if he targeted just a random group of people that he wanted to murder, that could be the situation. If it was him, or there could possibly be something that we don't know yet that hasn't been brought to our attention. Maybe the police knows in terms of a motive. If it was like a crime of passion, if he had been one of their teachers at one point. We don't really know the motive yet, and I don't know if we will know until everything kind of goes down. Brian Kohberger, so going back to the fact, he was actually a student teacher at the University of Washington. So what commonly happens is if you're going for your master's degree or if you're going to be a PhD student, a lot of the times you will either be a teacher's assistant or you'll be given a class to go ahead and teach. It's very common, and that's what was happening in the case of Mr. Kohberger. And so a lot of his students, as well as his teacher that was like the main teacher that he was working under, because again, he was still an assistant. Yeah, he said that he was like a really tough grader during the semester. However, that his behavior did noticeably change in November of 2022. So literally after the event, he said that there was no real red flags about him. However, she didn't really see him that often, so she couldn't really tell. So just like a really huge swing in grading behavior. Other than that, he has had friends, like previous friends and classmates speak out. A lot of them said he was just like a totally nice guy and that he had been bullied from like a younger age. But honestly, a lot of other people came out and said, no, he was more so of a bully when we were younger. He would like call people names and he had anger issues. Like if he were being bullied, he would kind of lash out. So we have a lot of different people speculating and saying a lot of different information. None of this really determines his guilt, just kind of like some suspicious activity and behavior. Other people were saying that in high school, he was heavily into drugs and that he was actually using heroin at the time, that he just like wasn't the best guy. So that could be a piece of information. But this is just kind of hearsay and people that are kind of explaining that their personal experiences with the guy. However, a review of court records in Washington and Idaho and Pennsylvania showed that there was no real criminal history of Kohberger aside from the fact that in August of 2022, he had an infraction or like a misdemeanor, not a misdemeanor, but he got like a parking ticket for not wearing his seatbelt in Lada County. But that was mainly it. Yeah, no real criminal record, not a whole lot of motive that we are familiar with. Really, if it's this guy, it's something that he was totally like planning for a long time. But I honestly don't think we're going to know exactly what until more of this case really unfolds closer to the actual court date. So on Thursday of this week, he actually had his next court case, and they had agreed to go ahead and push the trial by jury trial back out to June. And the reason why they decided on this is to allow the defense team enough time to gather like a good solid defense for him. Because right now, of course, we have the whole affidavit. We have a lot of that information that seems to be particularly damning towards him, and it seems like a strong case. But like I mentioned before, the media already has this case. Clearly, we're already talking about it. And there's already a narrative. And I'm not saying it's not him because the evidence does point towards him. But what happens is that the police will latch on to a guy and they will start investigating this person individually. And your gaze will start to sort of get like clouded. So it is possible that they kind of latched onto this guy and he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah, so it could literally be him. It could be someone else. We don't know yet. I'm sure we're going to find out a lot more information as this case keeps going on. I wouldn't be too upset if the police don't release all the information to us. I think they released the affidavit because it is public information, but since it's such a high media case, the public is obviously going crazy over it and the media is. It's a hot topic. So, but at the end of the day, like, they don't have to tell us everything. So I would just keep that in mind. Like, it happens all the time. Like, if you tell the public, we're going to run crazy with it, we're going to go mad, and we're going to tell them how they need to do their job. And we're the mob, like we're the mob. So I wouldn't be surprised if they are withholding certain bits of information while they further conduct this investigation. I wouldn't be so surprised. So we will likely hear some additional information coming up soon. However, as it stands now, the court hearing has been scheduled for later this year. It looks like in June of 2023. And this will allow the defense to gather additional information to build a case. So they're going to get going on that. Yeah, real tragic event. It really hits the home because, we're all just out here trying to, survive, go to college and do the right thing. So it's really tragic that something like this has happened, of course. It's just so random and so tragic. And I think that's what really sets America and people off, because it literally could have been anyone, unless, of course, there was a motive. Hopefully, we'll find more information out. We may never know of a motive, but we'll definitely learn more in the next couple of months. But yeah, I say remain vigilant, keep your eyes open, and keep your minds open, because I'm not saying he didn't do it, but with these media cases, time and time again, just remember that the media will latch onto a narrative. It happened with Amanda Knox. It happened with Scott Peterson. I'm not saying he's innocent, but he's going to be retried soon too. With these media cases, the media will spin a story and a certain narrative, and it's really invigorating, and it makes us upset, and it makes us totally damn someone like right off the bat. As we hear more information, keep your minds open, stay vigilant, and yeah, just stay safe. But that's about it, guys. But thank you so much, guys, for joining me. I know it was a little bit long, but I wanted to wait until we had all the information as possible before I really spoke on this. We could receive new news and it'll be completely different. So I'm going to try to remain vigilant on this case and update you as often as possible. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It was more of a serious note, but it felt kind of good because I feel like I do have a lot that I can contribute to these types of discussions. If you like this type of video, drop a comment and let me know if you like this, or if you kind of like the more silly, random foo-foo ones. I'll probably do a little bit of everything, Who said I have to do one thing? But it would be really nice to be able to help this case. Not that I'm going to be much help, but I think talking about these things are really good because we all have so much information and different takes and all of that. So thank you so much for joining me. If you like the video, please be sure to like the video and please hit subscribe. I know it's annoying, but I just need to keep reminding you while we build this channel up. If you have any suggestions for interesting stories that you want to discuss, feel free to comment below. Until next time, I will talk to you next week. It has been a pleasure chatting about this with you. Much love. My thoughts and prayers and everything are with the families that are involved and to the victims themselves, of course. So thank you so much. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.